You get today, we're going to try and give you as little information as possible. I think you'll appreciate that. So we are from Students for Free Tibet. It's this organization that works for human rights, freedom for Tibet. I think almost everybody would know that Tibet is a illegally occupied country.
It had its own sovereign government, has its own language, garb, customs, laws, postage, currency. It has its own rule. But when the Chinese government invaded, anyways, it was its own, its own independent nation. It had its own flag. We have our own national anthem. That was the case. But the Chinese government, when they came in and invaded Tibet in the early, in the 40s, in 49 and 50, they pretty much, as a direct result of that invasion, over 1.2 million Tibetans have died. Over 6,000 monasteries. These are, places of study, places of worship, institutions, library of the country and the people. They were destroyed. Thousands of Tibetans remain as political prisoners. Many have died, obviously. So that's the that's the invasion picture. And we don't even though Tibet was invaded, we don't like to consider ourselves as victims, because from the very beginning of the Chinese communist troops marching into Tibet, they've been met with resistance by the Tibetan people from the early 40s down to present day. And in 1959, March 10th, 1959, as we call it, is the Tibetan National Uprising Day. That was when Tibetans from across the Tibetan Plateau rose up against the Chinese occupation of Tibet, and which was obviously met with violent forces from the Chinese side, and it was crushed. And because of that, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the political and spiritual leader of Tibet, was forced to flee to exile into India. And following him, over 100,000 other Tibetans followed him into India. And my grandparents were actually one of them. So my grandparents had, my parents were obviously kids at that time who escaped through the Himalayan range into Tibet, and I was born in an exile community in a refugee settlement in South India. So that's how I end up here today, because obviously I'm not in Tibet, So that was 59, Tibetans escaped. Tibetans continued to resist through the 80s and 90s, and the most recent being in 2008. Now that was in March 2008, right before the 50th anniversary of the 1959 uprising, and this was huge. This was pretty much spread all across the Tibetan Plateau. Protests took all across the Tibetan Plateau, where Tibetans were rising up, calling for independence, calling for freedom, calling for human rights, calling for the release of political prisoners. Now, that was right before the whole Beijing Summer Olympics. Did you guys watch the Summer Olympics, 08?
There's a movement now among Tibetans. The Dalai Lama, since 1989, he has been trying to reach out to the Chinese government and say, okay, we don't need independence. It's okay, you can give us autonomy, genuine autonomy. And we are okay to live within the framework of the Chinese empire, PRC, so long as you give us home rule, domestic economy, these certain kind of factors, so long as we have these certain freedoms and rights to do these things in our own country. It's a huge compromise that he has made, the Tibetan government. At the same time, it's also a very, extremely reasonable, moderate kind of position that he's taking, that the Chinese government would do well to appreciate and actually respond. But, so until now, the Chinese government has not only ignored his request, but actually continued to attack him and the government for not being genuine. There are also a lot of Tibetans who still fight for independence. And among Tibetans, almost everybody desires independence. There's no doubt. Between freedom and half freedom, why would you choose half freedom? It makes no sense. But when it comes to negotiating and demand, a lot of Tibetans will be okay to say, oh, yeah, if we could really get genuine autonomy, it's better than the current situation, so we can live under that. We'll take that. But people like us, because we believe that independence is achievable through nonviolent campaign and nonviolent action. And because of that, we continue to wage our struggle for independence, and we actually demand independence. And that's the only difference between us and the Tibetan government, the position of the Dalai Lama. And some people feel uncomfortable with that difference. But it's been long enough now. It's been like 15, 20 years, and we have come to live with this difference and work together with this difference, right? And the main thing is both the Tibetan government and the Tibetan activist movement agree that nonviolence is the best way to achieve our goal. And because of that, we don't have a huge kind of division or a lot of internal problems or divisions within our movement. Some people believe that we should continue to demand independence. Others believe we should work out with genuine autonomy. And I know I've only